Winter had come early to San Giovanni Rotondo that year, settling over the Gargano Mountains like a heavy, unmoving shroud. By nightfall, the air turned sharp as broken glass, and the ancient stones of the friary seemed to groan under the weight of the cold. A soft fog curled around the outer walls, swallowing the lantern light, dimming it into trembling points, fragile, uncertain, as though even fire feared to breathe too loudly in such a night. Inside the monastery, the silence was immense. Not the peaceful quiet of a church afternoon, but a silence so deep it pressed against the ears, thick, watchful, almost living. It was the kind of silence that amplified every faint sound, the distant drip of water in the cloister, the sigh of wood contracting in the cold, the faint rustle of robes from a monk turning in his sleep 2 corridors away. But Padre Pio was not asleep. In the small side chapel, bare, dim, nearly forgotten by most of the brothers, he knelt alone before the tabernacle, his rosary slipping steadily through his fingers. A single oil lamp flickered beside him, throwing long, swaying shadows across the stone floor. His breath came out in soft clouds, visible in the cold. The scent of old wood, extinguished candles, and lingering incense clung to the air. He had been fighting a deep heaviness all evening, a strange disturbance he could not quite name. It was not fear. Padre Pio rarely felt fear in the human sense, but a spiritual tension, the way air changes before a storm breaks.
For hours, there had been signs. First, a subtle scent of smoke had passed through the chapel, gone almost before he noticed it. Then, the lamp flame had begun to quiver, dancing even though the air was still. And twice, he thought he heard something like footsteps, soft, slow, hesitant, somewhere beyond the chapel door. But when he paused his prayers and listened, the monastery was silent again. Padre Pio pressed the crucifix of his rosary to his forehead. Signore, si è la tua volontà, fa che io comprenda. Lord, if it is your will, help me understand. As he prayed, another chill swept through the room, brushing the back of his neck like a cold hand. The lamp flame shrank to a thin blue line, then flared back to life. This time, the scent of smoke did not vanish. It grew. Not sharp like a burning hearth, but old, suffocating, bitter. The scent of something once burned long ago, embedded in memory more than in air. Padre Pio slowly rose, his knees stiff from the hard floor. He lifted the lamp, shielding the flame with one hand, and stepped toward the chapel entrance. The wooden door creaked open with a groan that echoed down the hallway.
The corridor beyond was nearly pitch black, lit only by the faint glow of a lantern swinging weakly at the far end. Fog had somehow seeped into the building, drifting low along the floor like pale smoke. The moment he stepped into the hallway, he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the living. A single footstep, then another, soft, dragging, as though someone walked with great effort. Padre Pio's heartbeat remained steady, but his senses sharpened. He knew well the signs of an approaching soul. He had experienced them since his youth. Some came gently, some came in torment, and some came in deception. So he moved carefully, leaning into prayer with each breath. As he walked, the air grew colder. The flame in the lamp trembled violently, as if trying to flee. When Padre Pio passed the entrance to the main cloister, a sudden gust, impossible in an enclosed stone hallway, blew against him and snuffed out the lamp. Darkness swallowed him. For a few seconds he stood motionless. The silence returned, heavier than before, as if the monastery itself held its breath. Then a new sound emerged.
A faint crackling, like embers shifting in a dying fire. Padre Pio lifted his hand, tracing the sign of the cross into the darkness. A thin glow appeared farther down the corridor, orange, unsteady, like the glimpse of a candle behind a moving shadow. But he knew it wasn't a candle. It was too low to the ground, too irregular, too alive. He moved toward it, step by slow step. His bare feet on the stone made almost no sound, yet the presence ahead seemed to listen, to wait. When he reached the corner that led toward the abandoned guest rooms, the glow flickered, then vanished. But the smell of burned cloth thickened, clinging to the back of his throat. Padre Pio whispered, "Sei un'anima? Chiunque tu sia, che il Signore ti illumini." Are you a soul? Whoever you are, may the Lord give you light. A breath, cold, despairing, moved past him, and somewhere in the dark, deeper than words, he felt it. He was not alone. A soul was near, a soul that had wandered for a long, long time, and tonight it had come seeking him.
Padre Pio stepped out of the chapel, the old wooden door closing behind him with a slow, weary sigh. The corridor stretched ahead, long, narrow, and dim, its stone walls absorbing even the smallest sound. A thin draft moved through it, whispering along the floor like a pale ribbon of cold mist. The flame of the small candle he carried fluttered wildly, as if resisting the darkness that pressed close from all sides. For a moment, everything was still. Then it came. A footstep, soft but unmistakable. It echoed from the far end of the hallway, near room 4, a room that had not been touched or used in years. The brothers avoided it unconsciously, as though some memory of the old fire lingered in their bones. No one walked there at this hour. No one walked there at all. Padre Pio paused, listening. Another step, slow, dragging, as if someone's foot brushed the stone floor with effort or sorrow or pain. He raised the candle slightly. Its golden glow barely pierced the hallway, casting trembling shadows along the walls. The air grew colder in an instant, so cold that the skin on his arms prickled beneath his habit. It felt as though the warmth of the entire monastery was being pulled into that single, abandoned room. The candle trembled again, bending sideways as if an invisible hand had brushed past it. Padre Pio's breathing stayed calm, but inside he recognized the shift, the unmistakable sensation of a spiritual presence drawing near. Not hostile, but heavy, grieving, lost. He had felt such presences before, souls caught between worlds, searching for prayer, for hope, for someone who could see them. A faint echo traveled down the hall, like a whisper carried inside the cold. The footsteps grew clearer, closer. They did not follow the rhythm of a living man. There was no weight behind them, no natural cadence, only a strange, hollow resonance, as if the sound came not from feet, but from memory itself. Padre Pio tightened his grip on the candle, whispering under his breath, "Lord, guide whomever seeks the light tonight." The flame steadied suddenly, as if answering the prayer. And from the darkness ahead, room 4 seemed to exhale a breath that had been held for 10 long years. A presence was waiting.
The corridor narrowed as Padre Pio approached the old guest wing. The candle in his hand dimmed again, shrinking to a trembling bead of flame. The air was colder here, so cold that every breath felt like inhaling thin shards of winter. Somewhere in the distance, a drop of water fell and echoed like a distant bell. He stopped at the entrance of a small sitting room, once meant for travelers who passed through the friary. No one had used it in decades. The windows were shuttered, the walls stained by time. Only the faint outline of old wooden chairs remained, ghost-like in the dim glow. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped sharply. The flame bent sideways, then rose straight again. And Padre Pio knew he was no longer alone. Standing in the center of the little room was a man, a stranger, a man he had never seen among the villagers, nor among the living. The figure was motionless at first, as if carved from the darkness itself. But as the candlelight steadied, the outlines became clear, terrifyingly clear. His clothes were torn and blackened, hanging from him in ragged strips. His sleeves were burned through, revealing arms mottled with dark patches, as though the fire had licked and bitten at his flesh. His face was half-shadowed, half-scorched, the skin on his cheek twisted into hardened lines of ruin. Yet the horror of it was not what struck Padre Pio most. It was his eyes. They were gentle, achingly gentle, filled with an ancient sorrow rather than malice. They held no anger, no rage, no threat, only a heavy, quiet plea, the plea of someone who had carried suffering far longer than any human should. The man did not move. He simply stood there, breathing softly, the faint sound of it oddly distant, as though his breath came from some other place. Padre Pio did not flinch. His soul had long been tempered by gifts and trials from beyond the veil of the natural world. The extraordinary no longer startled him, it only called him to deeper discernment. He lifted the candle higher. "Peace be with you," he said, calmly, his voice steady despite the icy air. "Who are you?" The man blinked slowly, as though awakening from a long sleep. His burned fingers twitched, curled slightly, then relaxed. The smell of old smoke drifted faintly around him. Not fresh fire, but something buried in time, something remembered. He took one step forward. The floor did not creak beneath him. The shadows did not change. His movement was light, almost weightless, like a memory walking. When he spoke, his voice was low, coarse, and strangely hollow, like someone speaking from behind a thick wall or from beneath the earth. "Father!" The word trembled with emotion. "I did not mean to frighten you." Padre Pio felt the stirrings of compassion. "You have not frightened me. Tell me what troubles your soul." The man's burned hands rose slightly, as if unsure what to do with themselves. His eyes glistened with something deeper than pain, something like longing. "You see me. At last, someone sees me." Padre Pio nodded gently. "Are you a soul in need of prayer?" The man swallowed, though his throat bore the marks of fire. He opened his mouth as if to answer, but instead he closed his eyes, and a shudder passed through him. For a moment, Padre Pio saw the truth of him. Not as he appeared now, but as he had once been, a man alive, with a face unscarred, wearing simple work clothes, carrying a small satchel. A momentary flash of light, like a memory torn from another world, played before him. A hallway engulfed in flames, the man pounding on a locked door, smoke swirling as the beams collapsed. Then the vision faded, and the burned stranger stood before him again. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a breath. "I have wandered 10 years." The words fell heavy in the little room. The monastery seemed to lean in, listening. Padre Pio's expression remained calm, but his heart stirred. A decade of wandering, restless, without peace, was a terrible suffering for any soul. "Tell me your name," Padre Pio said softly. The man looked up, and for the first time, a faint glow flickered around him, like the final ember of a long-dead fire. "My name," he began, shaking slightly, "is Pietro." He lowered his eyes. "Pietro di Mauro." The name seemed to linger in the cold air, vibrating gently, as though the walls themselves recognized it. Padre Pio stepped closer. The man's burned form flickered slightly, like a reflection in disturbed water, but his eyes stayed steady, sad, humble, pleading.
Padre Pio spoke gently, firmly. "Pietro, why have you come?" The man lifted his scorched hands as if reaching out but not quite able to touch. "Because," his voice cracked with despair and hope interwoven, "I have waited for the one who could hear my cry." He lifted his gaze, eyes shining with a fragile, luminous sadness. "And tonight, Father, you finally did."
For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The little room was still, almost reverent, as though the very shadows bowed their heads in silence. Padre Pio's candle flickered softly between them, casting trembling waves of light across the man's ruined face. Pietro stood there, his breath thin and uneven, as if each word he prepared to speak dragged up a memory buried under ashes. Finally, he lifted his head. "Father," he whispered again, "I am Pietro di Mauro." The name trembled in the air, and with it came a heaviness, an old sorrow that seemed to seep from his very form. Padre Pio lowered the candle slightly and nodded, inviting him to continue. Pietro's voice broke before it began. He looked down at his burned hands, turning them as though they did not belong to him anymore. When he finally spoke, the sound was soft, thin, and hollow, like wind passing through a cracked door. "I died here, in this place, 10 years ago." Padre Pio remained still, offering him the grace of listening. Pietro gestured weakly toward the far wall, the direction of room 4, long abandoned, long whispered about.
"It was the night of September 18th, 1908, he said. "I had come to the friary seeking shelter. A poor man does not ask for much, only a roof for the night and a prayer for the next day. The brothers, they were kind." A faint smile touched his broken lips, warm despite the agony carved into his face. "They let me stay in the guest room, room 4. He closed his eyes, and when he continued, the words grew heavier. "But that night, Father, something went wrong." The candle flickered violently, as though responding to a truth long hidden. "I woke to the smell of smoke," Pietro whispered. "At first I thought it was a dream, but then the heat was everywhere. The door was burning. The beams above me were already crackling. I tried to shout, but the smoke filled my throat. I pounded on the door, Father. I pounded until my hands bled." His fingers trembled as he spoke, remembering the agony. "No one heard me. No one knew I was trapped inside." A gust of cold air swept through the room, though no window was open. "I remember the sound," Pietro said. "The beam falling, the light exploding, the fire swallowing everything. I remember reaching for the door one last time and feeling nothing, just darkness, deep, suffocating darkness." Padre Pio made the sign of the cross silently. "When I awoke," Pietro continued, "I was standing outside my own body. I saw the charred boards, the ashes, the brothers gathering in shock. I saw them bury me, a stranger without family, a name written in the town registry and forgotten.
His voice cracked again, but he forced himself to go on. I thought death would bring peace, but no. There were things I had not confessed, sins I carried with me. Small to men, perhaps, but not small to God. He pressed his burned hand to his chest, where his heart would have been. I stole once, Father, only small things, bread, a coat, but I justified it. I blamed life, I blamed poverty. I never asked forgiveness, and worse, I lived without gratitude. I cursed God in moments of despair. I thought he had abandoned me. Pietro lifted his face, and tears, luminous, not earthly, gathered in his eyes. And because of that, I was not ready to meet him. He swallowed, the sound brittle and painful. For 10 years I have wandered, not in hatred, not in rebellion, only in sorrow. Every night I returned here, to the place where my life ended. I stood outside room 4, waiting for someone, anyone who could hear my cry. His gaze locked onto Padre Pio's, full of pleading. Tonight, at last, God allowed it. Padre Pio stepped closer, compassion softening his features. Pietro, what do you seek of me? The burned man fell to his knees, not in terror, but in humble supplication. His scorched clothing whispered against the cold floor. Father, I cannot cross into the light, not until a Mass is offered for my soul. I have no family, no one to pray for me. I have waited 10 long years for someone who could see me, someone whom God would permit to hear me. His voice broke into a fragile whisper. Padre Pio, please, offer a holy Mass for me. He bowed his head, trembling, as if the request itself cost him the last of his strength. Only then will I be free.
Padre Pio remained still for several heartbeats, the silence folding around them like a heavy cloak. Pietro's plea lingered in the cold air, trembling with desperation and humility. But Padre Pio, seasoned in spiritual warfare, did not answer immediately. He had learned, through battles both unseen and searing, that not every voice from beyond sought salvation. Some came clothed in sorrow, but carried deception beneath. The enemy, he knew, could mimic a cry for help. Padre Pio's gaze softened with compassion, but his voice remained firm. Pietro, before I offer anything, I must discern your spirit. You understand. The burned soul lifted his head. There was no anger in his eyes, no offense, only a deep, weary acceptance. Yes, Father, test me. I desire only the truth, he whispered. Padre Pio nodded gently. He reached into the pocket of his habit and withdrew a small vial of holy water, always with him, always ready. The moment the glass touched the air, the temperature in the room shifted. The flame of the candle near the doorway wavered, struggling for breath. Pietro watched with calm resignation. Padre Pio uncorked the vial. The faint
Padre Pio remained still for several heartbeats, the silence folding around them like a heavy cloak. Pietro's plea lingered in the cold air, trembling with desperation and humility. But Padre Pio, seasoned in spiritual warfare, did not answer immediately. He had learned, through battles both unseen and searing, that not every voice from beyond sought salvation. Some came clothed in sorrow, but carried deception beneath. The enemy he knew could mimic a cry for help. Padre Pio's gaze softened with compassion, but his voice remained firm. Pietro, before I offer anything, I must discern your spirit. You understand. The burned soul lifted his head. There was no anger in his eyes, no offense, only a deep, weary acceptance. Yes, Father. Test me. I desire only the truth. Padre Pio nodded gently. He reached into the pocket of his habit and withdrew a small vial of holy water, always with him, always ready. The moment the glass touched the air, the temperature in the room shifted. The flame of the candle near the doorway wavered, struggling for breath. Pietro watched with calm resignation. Padre Pio uncorked the vial. The faint scent of blessed oil drifted through the frigid room. With a steady hand, he traced the sign of the cross in the air and let the holy water fall in 3 droplets, each drop sparkling in the weak candlelight before landing on the floor between them. 1 droplet grazed Pietro's burned hand. Nothing happened. No hiss, no scream, no twisting of the spirit's form. Pietro did not recoil or tremble. Instead, he closed his eyes almost with relief, as though the blessed water soothed rather than seared him. Padre Pio stepped closer and sprinkled the water again, this time letting several drops fall directly upon the burned man's shoulders and chest. The droplets glimmered briefly against his ruined clothing and simply disappeared into him like mist meeting dawn. Still, no reaction, except a quiet, humble bow of the head. The demon, Padre Pio knew, could not imitate humility, nor could it bear sanctity without violent recoil. Pietro lifted his gaze slowly. Father, if the Lord wills, I remain. If the Lord forbids, I cannot stand. I am here only because He allowed it. His voice wavered, heavy with sincerity. I have no desire to deceive you. I ask only to be remembered in one holy Mass. Padre Pio's heart stirred. The truth radiated from Pietro, not through dramatic signs, but through the quiet ache of a sorrow that had endured for years.
Yet he tested further. Say the name of Jesus with love, Padre Pio commanded. The burned soul placed a trembling hand over his chest where his heart once beat. Jesu, his voice broke, my hope, my mercy, my Savior. It was not the scream of a tortured spirit, not the forced mimicry of a deceiver. It was a confession, tender, cracked, and real. Padre Pio felt the air shift once more, this time not colder, but warmer, as though an unseen light had passed briefly between them. Yes, he whispered to himself, you are who you claim to be. Pietro looked up, eyes shining with gratitude. Padre Pio closed the vial of holy water, returned it to his pocket, and spoke with gentle certainty. Pietro de Mauro, child of God, your suffering has been long, but the Lord shows mercy to the humble of heart. The burned man's shoulders trembled under the weight of long-awaited affirmation. Padre Pio continued, I believe your words, I believe your sorrow, and I believe your desire for redemption. Pietro bowed his head once more, overwhelmed. For the first time in 10 years, he was seen. For the first time in 10 years, he was believed. And for the first time in 10 years, hope flickered, weak but real, within his wandering soul. Padre Pio raised a hand in blessing. I will offer the Mass for you, Pietro. The spirit closed his eyes, and from his ravaged form came a sound like a quiet exhale, relief, gratitude, and a hint of peace long denied. And Padre Pio knew
This was no deception. This was a soul finally stepping out of darkness.
The monastery had long fallen into silence, yet Padre Pio remained awake. A single candle burned beside him, its flame trembling like a soul caught between two worlds. He knelt before the crucifix, hands folded tightly, whispering prayers for the suffering spirit of Pietro di Mauro. Hour after hour passed. The night deepened, then grew thin, but Padre Pio did not rise. He knew that souls in purification carried wounds no human eye could see, wounds only grace could heal. And so he prayed, slowly, steadily, with the quiet endurance of a man who understood that mercy required sacrifice. At times he felt a chill brush his shoulders, as if Pietro's spiritual anguish drifted through the chapel. Other moments, the silence grew so heavy it seemed to press against his chest. Yet Padre Pio continued, offering every bead of his rosary, every sigh of prayer, every moment of fatigue for the liberation of that soul. By the time the pale light of dawn slipped through the window, his eyes were swollen with exhaustion, but his spirit remained firm. He finished his final prayer, made the sign of the cross, and rose. When he stepped into the corridor, he sensed a gentler air, still, but no longer burdened. As he prepared for morning mass, he felt an unmistakable certainty settle in his heart. Later that morning, Padre Pio spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if addressing someone standing just beyond sight. "Persevere in prayer, my son," he said. "With persistence, you will reach heaven." And with those words, the story came to its quiet end, for the soul of Pietro di Mauro had found peace, lifted by a night of relentless prayer and the boundless mercy of God.